Mafia boss kidnapped her for revenge, but never expected to fall in love. Before we dive into the story, tell me where in the world you're watching from, and if this story steals your heart, please hit subscribe. The silence of the British Museum at 2 in the morning was not empty. It was heavy, filled with the breathing of 10,000 years of history. For Ariana Cross, this was the only time the world made sense. Standing on a stepladder in the Textile Conservation Lab, she carefully manipulated a micro-vacuum over the fraying hem of a 17th-century velvet cloak. The air smelled of sterile dust and chemical solvents, a scent she found far more comforting than the expensive perfumes that used to choke the air in her father's house. She was 27 years old, and she had spent the last decade making herself invisible, burying the Cross name under layers of academic obscurity and solitary work. The storm battering the glass roof high above was merely background noise, a rhythmic drumming that usually helped her focus, but tonight, the shadows in the corner of the lab seemed to stretch toward her with unnatural intent. Ariana paused, her hand hovering over the velvet. The ambient hum of the security system had cut out. It was a subtle shift, barely perceptible unless one was intimately acquainted with the building's nocturnal rhythms, but the sudden absence of the low-frequency drone made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. She lowered the vacuum, her heart beginning a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. She told herself it was just a power fluctuation caused by the London storm, yet her instincts, honed by a childhood spent navigating a house full of dangerous men, screamed otherwise. She descended the ladder, her soft shoes making no sound on the linoleum floor, and reached for her phone. The screen was dead, no signal, no Wi-Fi. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at her skin. She turned toward the double doors, intending to find the night guard, but the doors swung open before she could take a step. They moved like oil on water, silent and fluid. 4 men dressed in tactical black gear swept into the room, their movements precise, their faces obscured by balaclavas. Ariana backed away until her hips bumped against the worktable, her hazel eyes widening in terror. She did not scream. She knew from bitter experience that screaming rarely stopped men like this. Then the 4 men parted, creating a corridor for a 5th figure to enter. He did not wear tactical gear. He wore a bespoke suit of charcoal wool that fit his broad shoulders with architectural precision. He was tall, dominating the space with an aura of lethal control that made the air feel thin. He had no mask. His face was a striking landscape of hard angles and harsh beauty, dominated by eyes the color of polished steel that locked onto her with terrifying intensity. Damien Vale looked at the woman backed against the table and felt a surge of dark, vindictive satisfaction. She was smaller than he expected, her petite figure hidden beneath a loose beige sweater and a practical skirt, but the features were unmistakable. She had Marcus Cross's nose and the same deceptive softness that the old man used to disarm his enemies. Damien had spent 3 years planning this moment, 3 years rebuilding the empire Marcus had stolen from the Vale family, 3 years waiting for the perfect leverage, and here she was, the beloved daughter, the only thing Marcus Cross was rumored to care about in this miserable world. Damien stepped forward, the sound of his dress shoes echoing like a gavel strike in the silent lab. "Ariana Cross," Damien said, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. It wasn't a question. He spoke her name as if it were an acquisition he had just finalized. "You are working late. I would have expected a woman of your station to be enjoying the nightlife of Mayfair, not inhaling dust in a basement." Ariana gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. She recognized the look in this man's eyes. It was the same look her father's associates wore right before people disappeared. This was about Marcus. It was always about Marcus. A bitter laugh threatened to bubble up in her throat, but she swallowed it down. If this man thought she was important to her father, he was operating on intelligence that was 10 years out of date. But correcting him now, when he looked ready to burn the world down to get what he wanted, felt like a suicide mission. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice steady despite the trembling in her legs. "The security guards are asleep," Damien cut in smoothly, closing the distance between them until he was looming over her. He smelled of rain, expensive scotch, and gun oil. "They will wake up with headaches, but they will wake up. You, however, are coming with me." Ariana's eyes darted to the scalpel on the tray beside her, a tool for cutting threads, razor-sharp but tiny. Damien followed her gaze and smirked, a cold, humorless expression that didn't reach his eyes. He reached out and picked up the scalpel, examining the blade with mock interest before tossing it casually across the room. It clattered uselessly into a corner. "I wouldn't," he advised, his tone almost bored. "My men are professionals, Miss Cross. They have orders to retrieve you unharmed, but I can rescind that order if you make this difficult. I imagine Marcus would pay just as much for you with a few bruises." The mention of her father's name confirmed it. He was kidnapping her for ransom or leverage. The absurdity of it washed over her. Marcus Cross wouldn't pay a dime for her. He hadn't spoken to her since she changed her major from business to art history and refused to marry the son of his Russian laundering partner. To Marcus, she was a failed investment. But looking at the dangerous set of Damien's jaw, Ariana realized that telling him the truth right now would make her useless to him. And useless hostages were usually disposed of. To survive the night, she had to be the valuable pawn he thought she was. "What do you want?" she asked, forcing herself to meet his gaze. "Justice?" Damien replied, the word dripping with venom. He reached out and grasped her upper arm. His grip was firm, iron-hard, yet surprisingly he did not bruise her. "Your father took something from me a long time ago. I am simply balancing the ledger. You are the currency." He pulled her forward. Ariana stumbled, her shoes skidding on the floor, but he caught her, steadying her against his chest for a fleeting second. She felt the hardness of a shoulder holster beneath his suit jacket. "Walk," he commanded. "If you run, I carry you. If you scream, I gag you. Choose your dignity, Miss Cross." She chose dignity. Head high, clutching her cardigan around herself as if it could shield her from the nightmare unfolding, Ariana walked. They moved swiftly through the service corridors, exiting into the pouring rain of the back alley where a black SUV waited with the engine purring. The cold rain soaked her instantly, plastering her hair to her cheeks, but Damien shielded her head with his hand as he shoved her into the backseat. He climbed in beside her, the doors locked with a heavy thud, and the vehicle peeled away into the wet London night. The drive to the private airfield was a blur of neon lights and rain-streaked windows. Damien spent the journey on his phone, speaking in rapid, clipped Italian. Ariana sat pressed against the opposite door, hugging her knees. She studied him in the intermittent flashes of streetlights. He was terrifyingly handsome, possessed of a brutal elegance that unnerved her more than the guns his men carried. He ignored her completely, which was both a relief and an insult. He saw her as luggage. A distinct object to be transported. They boarded a private jet that was waiting on the tarmac, engines whining. The interior was cream leather and mahogany, a flying palace that spoke of immense wealth. Damien gestured to a seat. "Sit, buckle up. It is a 3-hour flight to Naples, then a helicopter ride." "Naples?" Ariana asked, her voice cracking. "You're taking me to Italy." Damien finally looked at her, unbuttoning his suit jacket to reveal the white dress shirt underneath. He looked tired, the shadows under his eyes speaking of long nights and heavy burdens, but his gaze remained predatory. "I am taking you to my home, a fortress where your father's reach cannot extend. You will remain there until Marcus capitulates to my terms." "And if he doesn't?" Ariana asked quietly. Damien paused, pouring himself a glass of amber liquid from a crystal decanter. He took a slow sip, his gray eyes assessing her over the rim of the glass. "He will. Men like Marcus Cross have only 2 weaknesses, their vanity and their legacy. You are his legacy. He will bleed to get you back." Ariana turned her head to look out the window as the plane began to taxi. The lie sat heavy in the air between them. Damien Vale was a man who clearly prided himself on knowing everything, on controlling every variable. Yet he had built this entire operation on a fundamental misunderstanding of the Cross family dynamic. She was not a legacy, she was a liability. As the jet roared down the runway and lifted into the dark sky, leaving London behind, Ariana realized she was trapped in a high-stakes game of poker where her captor was bluffing with a card that had no value. When he found out, his wrath would be catastrophic. But for now, as the lights of England faded below, she was alive. And she intended to stay that way, even if she had to let the monster believe he had won. The helicopter ride from Naples was a disorienting journey through darkness and wind. By the time the rotor blades slowed to a halt, Ariana's nerves were frayed to the breaking point. She stepped out onto a landing pad carved directly into the rock face, the salty spray of the Tyrrhenian Sea misting instantly on her skin. Below her, waves crashed violently against jagged cliffs. Above, the silhouette of a sprawling villa loomed against the night sky like a sleeping beast. It was a fortress of stone and glass, ancient foundations seamlessly integrated with brutalist modern architecture. It was beautiful, isolating, and utterly impenetrable. Damien was at her side before she could stumble in the wind, his hand gripping her elbow to guide her toward the main house. "Careful," he shouted over the dying whine of the engine. "The drop is 300 feet. I did not bring you here to have you slip." Inside, the villa was a sensory shock of warmth and oppressive luxury. The floors were polished travertine, the walls lined with modern art that Ariana recognized, pieces worth millions. But her conservator's eye also caught the neglect. A Roman bust in the hallway was gathering dust in its crevices, and the humidity control in the gallery seemed non-existent. It was a house built to impress but not to be lived in. "This is your room," Damien said, stopping before a heavy oak door on the second floor. He pushed it open to reveal a suite that was larger than her entire London apartment. It had a private balcony, a king-sized bed draped in silk, and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the black abyss of the ocean. "You have free reign of the house with exceptions. The east wing is my office, forbidden. The basement levels are security and staff quarters, forbidden. The perimeter gates are alarmed and guarded by men who shoot first. Do not test them." Ariana turned to face him, hugging her arms around her chest. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a deep, aching exhaustion. "Am I a prisoner, Damien?" she asked, using his name for the first time. It felt heavy on her tongue. He looked at her, his expression unreadable. He seemed to fill the doorway, a dark barrier between her and the world. "You are a guest with restrictions," he corrected, though the irony in his voice was thick. "Dinner is at 8. My housekeeper, Alina, will bring you clothes. Do not be late." He closed the door, the lock clicking with a finality that made Ariana flinch. 2 days passed in a blur of gilded confinement. True to his word, Damien did not lock her in the room, but he was everywhere. His presence was a constant weight in the house. She saw him on the terrace in the mornings, drinking espresso while reading dossiers. She heard his voice echoing from the forbidden East Wing, low and angry, conducting business in languages she didn't speak. He was a ghost haunting his own castle, cold and distant. Ariana, unable to sit idle with her anxiety, began to wander. She found solace in the library, a massive room filled with rare first editions that were slowly succumbing to the damp sea air. It pained her. It was a professional reflex she couldn't suppress. On the third day, Damien found her there. He stood in the doorway, watching as she carefully wiped the leather cover of a 19th-century atlas with a microfiber cloth she had scavenged from the kitchen supplies. She had tied her hair back with a ribbon and rolled up the sleeves of the silk blouse Alina had given her. She looked focused, serene, a stark contrast to the terrified woman he had dragged from London. "You are cleaning," Damien stated, walking into the room. His steps were silent on the Persian rug. Ariana jumped, nearly dropping the book. She turned, clutching the volume to her chest. I'm preserving," she corrected, her voice shaky. "The humidity in here is too high, the bindings are warping. If you don't adjust the climate control, half of these will be ruined in a year." Damien stopped a few feet from her, his brow furrowed in genuine confusion. He had kidnapped the daughter of a billionaire crime lord, a woman he assumed spent her days shopping and her nights partying. He expected tantrums, demands for phone calls, tears. He did not expect her to be dusting his library. "You are worried about my books?" he asked, a hint of incredulity in his tone. "They aren't just books," Ariana said, a spark of defiance lighting her hazel eyes. "Their history. They don't deserve to rot just because their owner is too busy kidnapping people to take care of them." The silence that followed was deafening. Ariana held her breath, wondering if she had gone too far. Damien stared at her, and for a second the steel in his eyes softened into something like curiosity. Then the corner of his mouth twitched. "Noted," he said dryly. He walked over to a wall panel and punched in a code, adjusting the climate settings. "I will have the system serviced tomorrow, satisfied?" Ariana blinked, surprised by his concession. "Yes, thank you." "Dinner," he reminded her, turning to leave. "Tonight you dine with me, no trays in your room." Dinner was a tense affair served on the terrace under the stars. The table was set with silver and crystal, the food was exquisite Italian seafood, but the air was thick with unspoken threats. Damien poured wine, his movements graceful and predatory. He watched her eat, his gaze intense enough to make her hands tremble. "Your father has not responded to my initial contact," Damien said casually, slicing into a piece of swordfish. "He is stalling, or he thinks I am bluffing." Ariana's stomach twisted. She set down her fork. "Marcus is complicated." "He is a snake," Damien corrected, "but even snakes protect their nests. Tell me, Ariana, does he know about the account in the Caymans, the one in your name?" Ariana froze. She didn't have an account in the Caymans. She had a savings account with a few £1,000s in it. "I don't know what you're talking about." Damien leaned forward, the candlelight dancing in his dark eyes. "Don't play innocent. It insults my intelligence. I know he moves money through you. That is why you are here, not just for love, but for leverage." He was wrong, so wrong, but before she could formulate a safe lie, a commotion erupted from the side garden. One of the guards, a man named Russo, whom Ariana had seen leering at her earlier by the pool, stumbled onto the terrace. He was drunk, his uniform disheveled. He saw Ariana and grinned, a sloppy, ugly expression. "Boss," Russo slurred, ignoring the dangerous stillness that had overtaken Damien. "The perimeter is boring. I thought maybe the guest needs company." He took a step toward Ariana, his eyes raking over her dress. Ariana shrank back in her chair, the old fear of violent men seizing her throat. But before Russo could take another step, Damien was moving. It happened so fast Ariana barely registered it. Damien was out of his chair, a blur of motion. He didn't shout, he didn't posture. He simply grabbed a heavy crystal decanter from the table and smashed it across Russo's face in one fluid, brutal arc. Glass shattered. Russo screamed and crumpled to the stone floor, blood gushing from his nose and cheek. Damien didn't stop. He kicked the man in the ribs, a sickening crunch echoing in the night air, then hauled him up by his collar, dragging him to the edge of the terrace where the cliff dropped away into darkness. "Damien, stop!" Ariana cried out, standing up. The violence was terrifying, but the sudden explosion of rage from the controlled CEO was even worse. Damien held the sobbing guard over the railing with one hand, his face a mask of cold fury. "She is not for you," he hissed, his voice low and lethal. "She is not to be looked at, she is not to be spoken to. If you ever breathe in her direction again, you will learn to fly. Do you understand?" Russo nodded frantically, choking on blood. Damien threw him back onto the terrace floor like a sack of garbage. "Get him out of my sight," he commanded to the shadows where two other guards had materialized, looking pale. They dragged the weeping man away instantly. Damien stood there, chest heaving slightly, adjusting his cuffs. He looked at his hand, his knuckles were split and bleeding. He turned to Ariana. She was trembling, her eyes wide with shock. She had expected him to be a monster, but she hadn't expected him to be her monster. He had defended her with a savagery that was both horrifying and confusedly possessive. "Sit down, Ariana," he said, his voice returning to that eerie calm. I lost my appetite," she whispered, backing away. "I said sit," he commanded, but this time he walked over to her. He didn't grab her. He stopped inches away, his towering frame blocking out the moon. He reached out with his bloody hand and gently, almost reverently, tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. His fingers were warm and the metallic scent of blood mixed with his cologne. "You are under my protection," Damien said softly, his eyes searching hers. "That means no one touches you, not Russo, not your father, not anyone, until I decide otherwise. You belong to me, and I take care of what is mine." The declaration hung in the humid air, possessive and dark. Ariana felt a jolt of electricity shoot through her at his touch, a dangerous, treacherous spark of attraction to the man who held her captive. She should hate him, she should run. But as she looked up into his steel-gray eyes, she saw the loneliness behind the violence, the complexity of a man who destroyed to protect. And in that moment, the temptation to stop fighting him and let herself be protected was the most dangerous thing of all. She didn't sit, but she didn't run. She stood her ground, breathless, as the line between enemy and protector began to blur. The silence from London was not merely quiet, it was an insult. 2 weeks had bled away into the humid Italian summer, and the villa, once a fortress of calculated strategy, had transformed into a cage of restless frustration. Damien Vale was not a man accustomed to waiting. He was a man of precision strikes, of hostile takeovers executed with the timing of a symphony. Yet here he was, packing the marble floors of his Amalfi stronghold, checking a phone that refused to ring. Marcus Cross, the man who had supposedly doted on his only daughter, the man whose public image was built on the sanctity of family, had gone dark. There were no negotiators, no threats, no frantic offers of ransom. Just a static void that suggested Damien had miscalculated the one variable he thought was absolute, a father's love. Ariana felt the tension radiating off him like heat from a pavement. She had settled into a strange, ghostly routine within the villa's walls, tending to the antiques during the day and dining in suffocating silence with Damien at night. But the air had changed. The protective, possessive fire Damien had shown on the terrace had cooled into a volatile, brooding anger. He was rarely seen during the daylight hours now, disappearing into the forbidden East Wing or taking the boat out onto the rough waters alone. When he did appear, he looked through her, his jaw set in a line of granite, his eyes dark with a mixture of fury and confusion. She knew what was happening. Her father was proving her right, and the realization was slowly turning her captor into a caged animal. It was late one Tuesday evening when the facade finally cracked. The The storm that had been threatening the coast all day broke with violent intensity, lashing rain against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Ariana was in the library trying to distract herself with the first edition of Dante when the sound of crashing glass echoed from the lower levels. It was the distinct shattering sound of destruction, followed by a heavy thud that shook the floorboards. Fear, sharp and familiar, spiked in her chest. She should have stayed in the library, she should have locked the door. But the weeks of proximity to Damien had eroded her survival instincts, replacing them with a dangerous curiosity about the man beneath the suit. She followed the noise down the spiral staircase, past the main salon and toward the heavy double doors of the gymnasium. They were slightly ajar. Inside, the room was dimly lit, shadows stretching long across the rubberized floor. The air smelled of sweat, iron, and raw aggression. Damien was there, stripped to the waist, his hands wrapped in black tape. He was assaulting a heavy bag with a ferocity that terrified her. Each impact sounded like a gunshot: right hook, left cross, a brutal kick that sent the 100-pound bag swinging wildly toward the ceiling. He wasn't training, he was punishing. Ariana stood frozen in the doorway, her breath catching in her throat. Without the armor of his tailored suits, Damien was a revelation of violence. His back was a landscape of muscle and trauma. A jagged raised scar ran from his right shoulder blade down to his hip, a white puckered line that spoke of a blade that had missed the spine by millimeters. Another mark, darker and older, marred his ribs, a burn scar, the skin twisted and shiny. He was a man who had not just survived wars but had been forged in them. He looked less like a CEO and more like the gladiators who had once bled in the arenas of this country. Damien delivered a final, earth-shattering blow to the bag and stopped, his chest heaving. He didn't turn around, but his voice cut through the noise of the rain outside. "I told you the lower levels were forbidden," he rasped, his voice rough with exertion. "Do you have a death wish, Ariana, or are you simply incapable of following orders?" Ariana stepped into the room, the heavy door clicking shut behind her. The sound made him spin around. His chest was slick with sweat, his hair matted to his forehead, and his eyes were wild, dilated with adrenaline. He looked dangerous, unhinged in a way she had never seen him. But for the first time, Ariana didn't back away. The weeks of silence, of waiting for the other shoe to drop, had exhausted her fear. "You're angry because he hasn't called," she said softly. It wasn't a question. Damien ripped the tape from his hands, wincing as it pulled at his skin. He threw the wad of black adhesive into the corner and stalked toward her. "Angry is a mild word, Ariana. I am insulted. I am baffled. I have his only child. I have the one thing the world believes gives Marcus Cross a heart, and he is treating this negotiation like a minor labor dispute. He isn't stalling. He is ignoring me." He stopped inches from her, his looming presence sucking the oxygen out of the room. "Tell me why. Does he think I won't hurt you? Does he think his security team is already on the way? Tell me what game he is playing." "He isn't playing a game, Damien," Ariana said, her voice trembling but her gaze holding his. "He just doesn't care." "Liar," Damien spat, turning away to pace the room like a tiger. "Marcus Cross built a shrine to your mother. He kept your room in London exactly as it was when you were a child. My intelligence confirms he refused to expand his operations into Colombia because you were studying there and he feared for your safety. The man is obsessed with his image as a father." "His image?" Ariana interrupted, her voice rising. "You said it yourself, his image. Do you know why my room is untouched? Because I haven't stepped foot in it since I was 17. Do you know why he didn't go to Colombia? Because the cartels wouldn't give him the percentage he wanted, and using my safety was a convenient PR excuse to back out without looking weak." Damien stopped packing. He turned slowly to face her, his brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" Ariana felt the dam break. The years of silence, of pretending, of hiding the shame of being the unwanted daughter of a powerful man, it all came pouring out. She reached up and unbuttoned the cuff of her left sleeve, rolling it up to reveal a faint, straight white line on her forearm. "I got this when I was 12, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I interrupted a meeting he was having with a business partner. I just wanted to show him a drawing I made. He threw a crystal tumbler at the wall to scare me. A shard sliced my arm. He didn't hug me. He didn't call a doctor. He told his secretary to clean up the blood and sent me to boarding school the next week. I didn't see him again for 3 years." She took a step toward Damien, her eyes burning with unshed tears. "You kidnapped the wrong person, Damien. To Marcus, I am not a daughter. I am a tax write-off. I am a biological obligation he fulfilled and discarded. If you kill me, he won't grieve. He'll just use my death to garner sympathy in the press and maybe boost his stock prices. You have no leverage. You never did." The silence that followed was absolute. The only sound was the rain hammering against the roof and the heavy breathing of two people stripping away their defenses. Damien stared at her, his steel-gray eyes searching her face for any sign of deception. He looked for the flinch of a lie, the shift of a gaze. He found only the raw, hollow exhaustion of a child who had given up on being loved. Slowly, the tension left Damien's shoulders. The rage that had been fueling him seemed to drain away, replaced by a cold, dawning horror. He wasn't horrified by his plan failing, he was horrified by what he saw in her. He saw a reflection. "He discarded you," Damien whispered, the words heavy with disbelief. "I am invisible to him," Ariana confirmed, pulling her sleeve back down, hiding the scar. "So you can let me go or you can kill me, but waiting for him to save me is a waste of your time." Damien looked down at his own hands, scarred and battered. He walked over to a bench and sat down heavily, leaning his elbows on his knees, his head hanging low. For a long moment he didn't speak. When he finally looked up, the predator was gone. In his place was a man looking at a fellow survivor. "My father was not like yours," Damien said quietly. "He was a good man. He ran a shipping logistics company in Naples, honest work, no drugs, no weapons, just cargo. Marcus Cross wanted the routes, he wanted the ports." Ariana watched him, sensing that this was a rare offering, a trade of secrets. "He didn't make an offer," Damien continued, his voice devoid of inflection, which made it all the more chilling. "He sent men to our house. I was 14. I hid in the pantry because my mother shoved me in there and held the door shut with her body." He gestured vaguely to the scar on his ribs. "They set the house on fire before they left. They wanted it to look like an accident. I listened to them burn Ariana. I listened to my mother scream my name until the smoke took her voice." Ariana gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. The brutality of it, the image of a 14-year-old boy trapped in the dark, listening to his world end, stole the breath from her lungs. "I clawed my way out through a basement window," Damien said, looking at the burn scar on his side. "But the boy who went into that pantry died there. The man who came out had only one purpose, to build an empire strong enough to crush Marcus Cross." He looked up at her, his eyes blazing with renewed intensity. "I thought taking you would break him. I thought I could make him feel a fraction of the loss I felt." "He can't feel it," Ariana whispered, tears finally spilling over her lashes. "He doesn't have a heart to break, Damien. You're trying to hurt a ghost." Damien stood up and walked toward her. This time there was no intimidation in his posture. He stopped in front of her, his presence encompassing her, heat radiating from his skin. He reached out, his rough thumb brushing away the tear that tracked down her cheek. The gesture was shockingly tender, a stark contrast to the violence of the room. "Then we have both been fools," he murmured. "I spent 20 years hatting a man who doesn't exist, and you spent 20 years waiting for a father who was never there." "What happens now?" Ariana asked, her voice barely audible, "since I'm useless to you?" Damien's hand lingered on her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. His eyes dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, darkening with a new kind of hunger, one that had nothing to do with revenge. "You are not useless," Damien said, his voice dropping to a low, rough rumble. "You are the only person on this earth who understands the enemy we face. You are not my leverage anymore, Ariana." "Then what am I?" "You are my guest," he said firmly, "and perhaps my ally." He pulled his hand away slowly, leaving a trail of fire on her skin. "Go to your room, lock the door. Tomorrow, everything changes. I am done waiting for Marcus to act. If he will not come for you, I will bring the war to him, and I will make sure he pays for every scar, yours and mine." Ariana watched him turn and walk back to the punching bag, not to hit it but to lean his forehead against the cool leather, a man carrying the weight of the dead. She turned and fled the gym, her heart pounding not with fear but with a terrifying, overwhelming realization. She wasn't just attracted to her captor anymore, she was starting to understand him. And in the dark, twisted world they both inhabited, understanding was the first step toward falling in love. The morning after the storm broke, the Amalfi coast was bathed in a light so brilliant it felt deceptively innocent. The sky was a hard, polished azure, scrubbing away the gray menace of the previous days, but inside the villa the atmosphere had shifted into something far more volatile. The air between Damien and Ariana was no longer thick with hostility, it was heavy with a magnetic, terrifying gravity. The lines of captor and captive had been washed away by the rain and the truth, leaving two exposed souls circling one another in the wreckage of their shared trauma. Ariana woke to find her bedroom door unlocked. It was a silent gesture, a granting of freedom within the fortress, but as she walked through the silent hallways, she knew she had no desire to leave. The outside world held only the ghost of a father who didn't want her, while inside these stone walls lived a man who, for the first time in her life, actually saw her. She found Damien on the lower terrace, a secluded stretch of limestone overlooking the churning sea below. He was not wearing his armor of bespoke suits. He stood at the edge of the precipice in dark linen trousers and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, the wind whipping the fabric against his muscular frame. He looked like a statue carved from the very cliffs he stood upon, solitary, enduring, and dangerous. Ariana watched him for a long moment before approaching. She saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his hand gripped the iron railing until his knuckles turned white. He wasn't looking at the view, he was scanning the horizon, a sentry waiting for war. When she stepped onto the stone, he didn't turn, but his posture softened imperceptibly, an acknowledgement of her presence that felt more intimate than a touch. "The storm has passed," Ariana said softly, joining him at the railing. She kept a respectful distance, though every instinct in her body urged her to close the gap. "The weather has passed," Damien corrected, his voice low and gravelly, vibrating with a fatigue he refused to show to his men. "The storm is just beginning, Ariana. I spoke to my contacts in Rome this morning. Your father has made a move." Ariana's heart stuttered. "He's sending someone." Damien finally turned to look at her. The sunlight caught the gray of his eyes, turning them into shards of silver. There was no triumph in his expression, only a grim, protective resolve. "He has frozen your assets. He has released a statement to the press claiming you are on a sabbatical in the French Polynesian Islands. He is erasing you, Ariana. He is clearing the board so he doesn't have to worry about collateral damage when he strikes back at me." The cruelty of it should have stung, but Ariana found herself strangely numb to Marcus's machinations. It was the confirmation she had expected. What shook her was the look on Damien's face, a mixture of fury on her behalf and a deep, simmering guilt. He had dragged her into this expecting a negotiation. Instead, he had exposed her to the ultimate rejection. "I told you," she whispered, looking out at the endless blue water. "He doesn't care." "I care," Damien said. The words were simple, but they landed with the weight of an oath. He closed the distance between them, his movements deliberate. He reached out and took her chin in his hand, forcing her to look up at him. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her that nearly buckled her knees. "I care, Ariana. I dragged you into this hell thinking you were a pawn. I was wrong. You are not a pawn. You are the only innocent thing in this entire wretched equation." The intensity of his gaze was overwhelming. Ariana felt the walls she had built around her heart, walls made of academic books, silence, and solitude, crumbling into dust. She saw the hunger in his eyes, a raw, visceral need that mirrored her own. They were two broken halves of the same dark circle. Without thinking, she leaned into his touch, her hand coming up to rest on his chest, feeling the heavy, rhythmic thud of his heart beneath the linen. "Damien," she breathed. The sound of his name on her lips seemed to snap the last of his restraint. He groaned, a low, guttural sound, and his other arm wrapped around her waist, pulling her flush against him. His mouth crashed down on hers, not with the tentative exploration of a first kiss, but with the starving desperation of a man who had been denying himself for too long. It was a kiss that tasted of sea salt, coffee, and suppressed rage. Ariana met him with equal force, her fingers tangling in his dark hair, pulling him closer. There was no fear, only a blinding, white-hot heat that consumed the logic of their situation. He swept her up into his arms, carrying her from the terrace as if she weighed nothing. The journey to his private quarters was a blur of stone corridors and hurried steps. When they reached his bedroom, a vast, masculine space of dark wood and shadows, he kicked the door shut and pressed her against it, kissing her until she was breathless, dizzy with the scent and feel of him. "Are you sure?" he asked, pulling back just enough to look into her eyes, his breathing ragged. "Once this happens, Ariana, there is no going back. I am not a man who lets go." "I don't want to go back," she answered, her voice steady. "I have nothing to go back to. I am exactly where I want to be." The admission shattered him. He carried her to the bed, and what followed was a reckoning. It was an unraveling of layers, clothes, defenses, secrets. Damien made love to her with a focus that was both terrifying and worshipful. He touched her as if she were one of the priceless artifacts in his collection, something rare and fragile that required his absolute protection, yet he possessed her with the dominant, unyielding power of the king of the Amalfi Coast. For Ariana, it was an awakening. For the first time, she wasn't hiding. She was seen, known, and claimed. In the tangled sheets, amidst the sweat and the whispers, they forged a bond that was stronger than blood, stronger than the feud that had brought them together. Hours later, the reality of their world intruded with the harsh buzz of a satellite phone on the nightstand. Damien was lying on his back, one arm draped protectively over Ariana, who was resting her head on his chest, listening to the slow, steady beat of his heart. The phone rang again, insistent and jarring. Damien cursed softly, the tenderness leaving his body instantly as the soldier returned. He reached for the device, his muscles tensing under her cheek. Vale, he answered, his voice ice cold. Ariana sat up, clutching the sheet to her chest, watching the transformation. She saw his eyes narrow, his jaw clench. He listened for a long minute, saying nothing, his expression darkening with every second. Understood. Initiate protocol, double the perimeter, Damien snapped, then ended the call. He sat up, swinging his legs over the edge of the bed, his back to her. The silence that stretched between them was terrifying. Damien, Ariana whispered. He turned to look at her, and the pain in his eyes broke her heart. That was my head of security. We have intercepted a communication. Marcus Cross has hired a private contractor group known as The Void. They are mercenaries, Ariana, former special ops. They don't do extraction, they do liquidation. Ariana felt the blood drain from her face. He sent them to kill you. He sent them to sanitize the situation, Damien corrected, standing up and reaching for his discarded trousers. That means everyone in this villa, me, my men, and you. He thinks if he eliminates us all, he can spin a story that I killed you and then his heroic team took me out. He is willing to sacrifice you to keep his empire clean. He walked over to the safe built into the wall, punching in a code. The heavy steel door swung open, revealing stacks of cash, passports, and a heavy black pistol. He took out a thick envelope and a passport, tossing them onto the bed beside her. What is this? She asked, staring at the documents. The passport was French, the photo was hers, but the name was different. Elise Dubois. This is your life raft, Damien said, his voice flat, devoid of the passion that had been there only minutes ago. I have a boat waiting in the cove. It will take you to a contact in Corsica. From there you fly to Bali. There is enough money in that account to last you 3 lifetimes. The identity is bulletproof. Ariana Cross ceases to exist. You will be safe. Ariana looked from the passport to Damien. She saw what this offer cost him. He was ripping his own heart out to save her. He was sending her away because he believed he was a death sentence. And you, she asked, what will you do? I stay, Damien said, checking the magazine of the pistol with a metallic click. I draw their fire. I make sure they never look for you. I will burn Marcus Cross and his mercenaries to the ground, but I cannot do that if I am worried about your safety. You are a distraction I cannot afford, Ariana. He was lying, she could see it. He wasn't sending her away because she was a distraction. He was sending her away because he loved her and he knew that the coming fight would be a bloodbath. He was trying to be the noble hero, sacrificing his happiness for her survival. Ariana stood up, letting the sheet fall. She walked over to the bed, picked up the passport and looked at it for a long second. Then she looked Damien in the eye and tore the booklet in half. Damien froze. Ariana. No, she interrupted, her voice ringing with a strength she had found in this very room. She dropped the ruined pieces of her safety onto the floor. I am done running. I spent 10 years hiding in museums, hiding in silence, hoping that if I was quiet enough the monsters would leave me alone. They didn't. One monster ignored me and the other kidnapped me. She stepped closer to him, placing her hands on his bare chest, right over the scar on his ribs. I am not leaving you to die, Damien. Marcus destroyed your family. He destroyed my childhood. If you are going to burn him to the ground, I want to be there to light the match. You don't understand what is coming, Damien argued, grabbing her wrists, his grip desperate. This isn't a corporate takeover. This is war. People will die. It will be loud and bloody and terrifying. I know, she said, holding his gaze, but I would rather face a war with you than live a peaceful life wondering when you died. You said I was your ally. Prove it. Let me stay. Let me fight. Damien stared at her, searching for fear and finding only resolve. He saw the woman who had survived Marcus Cross's neglect, the woman who had tended to his books while held captive, the woman who had just given him her body and her trust. He realized then that sending her away would destroy him more effectively than any bullet. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in the crook of her neck, breathing her in as if she were the only oxygen in a room full of smoke. You are a fool, he murmured against her skin, his voice thick with emotion. A beautiful, stubborn fool. I learn from the best, she whispered back. Damien pulled back, his expression hardening into the mask of the CEO, the boss, the predator, but his eyes remained warm when they looked at her. If you stay, there are no more rules, no more glass walls. You are mine and I am yours, and we face this together. But understand this, Ariana, I will do things tonight that are unforgivable. I will become the monster you thought I was when we met. Can you love that man? I already do, she said. Damien nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. He turned back to the safe and pulled out a smaller, sleek handgun. He checked it, engaged the safety, and held it out to her handle first. "Then take this," he said, his voice solemn. "Stay close to me, trust no one but me. Tonight we end the Cross legacy. Tonight we take back what was stolen." Ariana took the cold metal weapon in her hand. It was heavy, a physical manifestation of the promise and the price of loving a man like Damien Vale. She didn't tremble. She gripped it tight, nodded, and stood by his side, ready for the reckoning. Outside, the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruising purple, signaling the end of the peace and the beginning of the war. The sun did not set over the Amalfi coast that evening. It seemed to hemorrhage into the sea, bleeding out a bruised purple twilight that offered no comfort. Inside the villa, the silence was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that draped over the expensive furniture and the ancient stone. Damien had extinguished the lights, turning the fortress into a void of shadows. They waited in the main atrium, the heart of the house, where the acoustics would betray any footstep. Ariana sat on the floor behind a heavy marble pillar, the cold metal of the pistol Damien had given her pressing against her palm. She was terrified, a primal fear that made her teeth ache, but beneath it ran a current of adrenaline-fueled clarity. She watched Damien moving through the gloom, checking the sight lines, a predator packing his cage. He was no longer the CEO who signed mergers. He was the boy who had survived the fire, honed by 20 years of waiting for this moment. The first sign of the attack was not a sound, but a vibration. The heavy oak front doors shuddered, followed a split second later by a muffled boom that rattled the crystal chandelier above them. Breaching charges. The main entrance blew inward in a shower of splintered wood and twisted iron. Smoke billowed into the atrium, thick and acrid, carrying the scent of cordite. "Stay low," Damien's voice was a whisper that seemed to originate from the walls themselves. Figures emerged from the smoke, men in black tactical gear moving with professional efficiency. The void. They swept the room with laser sights, green beams cutting through the dust. Damien waited until they were fully committed to the kill zone before he unleashed hell. He rose from behind a grand piano, his weapon flashing in the dark. The sound was deafening, a staccato rhythm of gunfire that echoed violently off the stone walls. Two of the mercenaries dropped instantly. The others scattered, returning fire, bullets chipping away at the priceless frescoes and shattering the ancient vases Ariana had so carefully dusted days before. Ariana pressed herself flat against the marble, covering her head as debris rained down. This was not a movie, it was chaotic, loud, and disorienting. She saw a mercenary flanking to the left, moving toward the spiral staircase that led to the upper levels and to Damien's blind spot. Without thinking, she raised the gun. Her hands shook, but her mind flashed back to the years of silence, the years of being invisible. She was done being a spectator in her own life. She aimed for the shadow moving against the wall and pulled the trigger. The recoil jarred her shoulder, the shot going wide and shattering a mirror, but the mercenary flinched, turning toward her. That split-second distraction was all Damien needed. He pivoted, spotting the threat she had exposed, and put 2 rounds into the man's chest. The attacker crumpled. "Move," Damien roared, sprinting across the open floor to grab her arm. "To the cellar." They ran through the kitchen, bullets chewing up the doorframe behind them. The entrance to the wine cellar was concealed behind a false wall in the pantry, a remnant of the villa's history as a smuggler's hideout. Damien punched in the code and the panel slid open. They scrambled into the cool, damp darkness of the underground tunnels just as the kitchen exploded in a hail of automatic fire. The panel hissed shut, sealing them in silence once more. The wine cellar was a labyrinth of brick arches and dusty bottles stretching deep into the cliffside. Damien didn't stop. He navigated the maze by touch, pulling Ariana deeper into the earth. They reached a central chamber where the ventilation systems hummed. Damien checked his weapon, then looked at her. His face was smeared with dust, his eyes wild. "You shot at him," he said, breathing hard. It was a statement of disbelief. "I missed," Ariana replied, her voice trembling but defiant. "You drew his fire," Damien corrected, gripping her shoulder. "You saved my life." "They're coming," she whispered, pointing to the ceiling. They could hear the muffled thud of boots on the floor above. The mercenaries were searching. "Let them come," Damien said, a cold, ruthless calm settling over him. "This is a bottleneck. They can only come down one by one, but Marcus isn't with them. He's outside waiting for the all-clear. He won't risk his suit until the shooting stops." "How do we get to him?" "We don't," Damien said, checking his watch. "We wait." The wait was agonizing. Time seemed to warp in the darkness. They heard the mercenaries searching above, the sounds of destruction as they tore the villa apart. Then, silence. A heavy, pregnant pause. Damien's phone buzzed, a single vibration. He looked at the screen and a grim smile twisted his lips. My security team outside has neutralized their perimeter guards, he whispered. The men inside are trapped, they just don't know it yet, and Marcus just landed. The sound of a helicopter rotor beat against the air outside, faint through the layers of rock. Damien stood up. He thinks his team has secured the building. He's coming in to verify the bodies. Stay here, Ariana. Keep the gun pointed at the door. If anyone comes through who isn't me, shoot. No, she said, grabbing his wrist. I am coming with you. I need to look him in the eye, Damien. I need him to see that I am still standing. Damien looked at her, seeing the steel in her spine that matched his own. He nodded. Stay behind me. They moved back up through the tunnels, bypassing the kitchen and emerging through a hidden panel in the main library. The room was wrecked, books torn from shelves, furniture overturned. The mercenaries were gone, likely sweeping the lower levels. The front doors of the villa were open to the night air. Standing in the center of the ruined atrium, flanked by two of his personal bodyguards, was Marcus Cross. He looked exactly as Ariana remembered him, immaculate, cold, and utterly untouched by the chaos he created. He wore a camel hair coat and held a handkerchief to his nose as if the smell of gunpowder offended his delicate sensibilities. He was looking down at the body of one of the mercenaries with an expression of mild distaste. Sloppy, Marcus murmured to his bodyguard, I pay for surgical precision and they give me a demolition site. Hello, Father, Ariana said. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the room like a blade. Marcus spun around, his eyes widening in genuine shock. Damien stepped out from the shadows of the library, his gun raised and leveled directly at Marcus's chest. The two bodyguards moved to raise their weapons, but the red laser dots of Damien's snipers positioned on the upper balcony appeared on their foreheads. They froze, slowly lowering their guns. Damien Vale, Marcus said, recovering his composure instantly. He looked from Damien to Ariana and a sneer curled his lip. And Ariana, you look terrible, darling. I assumed the accommodations were lacking. You tried to kill us, Ariana said, walking forward until she was standing next to Damien. You sent a death squad to kill your own daughter. Marcus sighed, a sound of long-suffering patience. I sent a team to clean up a mess, Ariana. You allowed yourself to be taken. You became a liability. In business, when an asset becomes a liability, you liquidate it. It's nothing personal. It's simply efficient. The words hung in the air, monstrous in their banality. Damien let out a low growl, stepping forward and pistol-whipping Marcus across the face. The blow knocked the older man to the floor, blood spraying from his split lip. Marcus scrambled backward, his composure shattering. You killed my parents for efficiency, Damien snarled, aiming the gun between Marcus's eyes. You burned a family alive for shipping routes, and now you try to kill the only person who shares your blood because she inconvenienced your stock portfolio. Damien cocked the hammer of the gun. The click was the loudest sound in the world. Marcus looked up, terror finally dawning in his eyes. Wait, he gasped. I can pay you whatever you want, roots, territory, money. I have enough money, Damien said, his finger tightening on the trigger. I want justice. Damien. Ariana's voice was soft, but it stopped him. She placed her hand over his, the one holding the gun. Damien looked at her, his eyes burning with the need for vengeance, the need to end the nightmare that had started 20 years ago. He deserves to die, Damien rasped. Yes, Ariana agreed, looking down at the pathetic man cowering on the floor. He does, but if you kill him like this, in cold blood, you become him. You become the monster who burns things down. You told me you wanted to build something. You can't build a future on a foundation of murder. She squeezed his hand. Look at him, Damien. He's pathetic. He's not a titan. He's just a lonely, greedy old man. Don't let him turn you into a killer again. Let him rot in a cell. Let him watch us live the life he tried to destroy. That is the real revenge. Damien's chest heaved. He looked at Marcus, then at Ariana. He saw the truth in her eyes. Killing Marcus would satisfy the anger of the boy in the pantry, but it would poison the man who wanted to wake up next to Ariana every morning. He slowly, agonizingly lowered the gun. You are right, Damien whispered. He uncocked the weapon. He turned to the shadows where his head of security had emerged. Hand the evidence to the Carabinieri, the recordings of his order to the void, the financial trails, everything. Make sure the press gets copies before the police do. I want his reputation destroyed before he even steps inside a courtroom. Marcus Cross slumped against the pillar, defeated not by a bullet but by his own irrelevance. Sirens began to wail in the distance, winding their way up the cliff road. The law was coming, and for the first time in the history of the Vale family, they were not coming for Damien. 6 months later. The Amalfi sun was warm, smelling of lemons and salt. The villa had changed. The heavy velvet drapes had been pulled down, allowing the light to flood the rooms. The dust was gone, and the humidity in the library was perfectly regulated. The security cameras were still there, discreet and watchful, but the armed guards no longer patrolled with assault rifles. They wore suits and earpieces, blending into the background of what had become a legitimate center of commerce. Ariana stood on the terrace, leaning against the stone railing. She held a tablet, reviewing the restoration plans for a Renaissance chapel in nearby Positano, a project funded by the Vale Foundation. She looked different. Her hair was cut in a chic, shorter style, and she wore a tailored white dress that spoke of confidence and power. The invisible girl was gone. In her place was the mistress of the house, a woman who commanded respect not because of who her father was, but because of who she was. Steps approached from behind, confident and heavy. Damien wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. He kissed the curve of her neck, his beard scratching softly against her skin. "Stop working," he murmured against her ear. "It is Saturday, even CEOs take days off." "I'm not working," Ariana smiled, leaning into him. "I'm planning. There is a difference." "Marcus was sentenced today," Damien said quietly. Ariana stiffened slightly, then relaxed. "Life." "Life," Damien confirmed. "Without parole, his assets have been seized. The Cross Empire is dust, Ariana, it is over." She turned in his arms to face him. Damien looked younger. The lines of stress around his eyes had softened. He still carried the scars both on his skin and in his soul, but they no longer defined him. He was a man who had chosen to walk out of the dark. "It was over the night you didn't pull the trigger," she said, reaching up to smooth the lapel of his jacket. "You won, Damien. You didn't just beat him, you outgrew him." Damien caught her hand and kissed her palm. "We won," he corrected. "I would have burned the world down if you hadn't been there to show me how to save it. You didn't just restore the antiques in this house, Ariana, you restored me." He pulled her closer, the tablet forgotten on the railing. Below them, the sea crashed against the rocks, eternal and constant, but the storm had passed. They stood together in the sunlight, no longer captor and captive, no longer victim and villain. They were partners, survivors, and lovers looking out at a horizon that finally belonged to them. "So," Damien said, a playful glint entering his gray eyes, "since the Empire is secure and your father is in prison, what do you want to do with the rest of the afternoon?" Ariana laughed, a sound that was light and free. "I saw a very neglected tapestry in the guest wing that needs attention." "The tapestry can wait," Damien said, sweeping her up into his arms as he had done that first night, but this time with a joy that filled the air around them. "I have much better ideas." He carried her inside, the glass doors closing behind them, shutting out the world and leaving them in the sanctuary they had built together, a home forged in fire but sustained by love.